Power lines. Many times we will need to work our cranes near and around power lines. It's important that we know how to do this safely. Notice that electrocution is the second leading cause of fatalities in the craning industry. Because of this, it's very important that we understand how to safely work around power lines. Now, OSHA has said we need to identify the work zone. Now, that work zone needs to be marked with boundaries, or we can identify that work zone as 360 degrees around the crane up to the maximum working radius. After we have identified our work zone, we need to ask ourselves, could you get within 20 feet of the power line? That is, could any part of the crane, the load, get within 20 feet of the power line? If the answer is no, no further action is needed. You can go to work. But if the answer is yes, OSHA has given us three options. Now, option number one is de-energize and ground. Option number two is to maintain a 20-foot clearance. And option number three says we have to ask the utility for the voltage and use table A to get those clearances. We're going to look at table A in just a minute. Now, that option number one is always our best option because it removes the hazards. That is, it de-energizes the power line and grounds it. If possible, we want to use option number one. Once the power lines are de-energized and ground, we can go to work. Now, if that doesn't work for us, if number one is not a good option, we go to option number two. Option number two says we're going to maintain 20-foot clearance. Now, to maintain this clearance, OSHA has given us some encroachment prevention measures. What do we have to do? We have to have a planning meeting. If taglines are used, these taglines must be non-conductive. We would have to have an elevated warning line, barricade, or line of signs. You can simply put up your red danger tape at that 20-foot clearance line to make that elevated line. And then OSHA says we have to do one of the following. We have to have a proximity alarm, a spotter, a warning device, range limiter, or insulating link. Now for us, in most cases, we're going to use a spotter. That is a dedicated spotter that can communicate with the operator. And he's going to be posted at that encroachment line, that 20-foot line in this case. But let's say to do the work, to get it done, we needed to get closer than 20 feet to the power lines. We can then use this option 3. Option 3 requires us to get the voltage from the power company and use table A to find out what those clearances are going to be. Then we would simply go ahead and use the encroachment prevention measures, the same ones we use for option 2, to make sure that we don't cross that clearance line that we look up in table A. Let's look at table A. All right, so this is table A, minimum clearance distances. Now notice as you look down the left-hand side, it says voltage nominal kV alternating current. And then below that, it says up to 50, or what would be up to 50 kV or 50,000 volts. It's the same thing. So for power line voltages up to 50 kV or 50,000 volts, we would slide across to the right to the column that says minimum clearance distance feet. And in that case, our minimum clearance line would now be 10 feet. We would put that elevated warning line at 10 feet, and we wouldn't want to get any closer, or we don't get any closer than 10 feet to those power lines. Now we work our way down. It says over 50, or that's over 50 kV to 200 kV or 200,000 volts. We slide across, and now our clearance will be 15 feet. And so again, we would put our line at 15 feet and we wouldn't cross that line. Now, for over 200 kV or 1000 volts to 350,000 volts, our clearance line would then need to be 20 feet. Now, notice below that you have a lightly shaded area, and that's for voltages over 350,000 volts or 350 kV. And the clearances are there for you. Now, we never would want to get any closer than 25 feet to a 350,000 volt power line or over 350,000 volt power line. The truth is, most of the time, if we're working around these voltages, the office is going to have this already laid out for you. But we do have those clearances right there just in case you need them. Now, on the bottom, there's a lightly shaded area. It says over 1,000, or that's over 1,000 kV. Those clearances are going to have to be established by the power line owner, operator. Those are professional engineers, and we'll get those clearances from them. What happens if we need to work even closer than that table A zone that we looked at? Well, here we have a provision to intentionally work closer than table A zone. But we must show that staying outside that zone is infeasible, and that it's infeasible to de-energize and ground the power lines. Once this is done, we would then need the power line owner to set our minimum approach distances. Once we have that, we would want to write that on our job ticket and also on our JSA. We would then, of course, want to have a planning meeting, talk about those distances. You would have to have a dedicated spotter at that line. That's all they do is spot the crane. That elevated warning line or barricade would also have to be up at those approach distances that the power line gives us. If the power line is going to use an insulated link, that link still has to maintain the same clearances that they gave us. Our rigging would then need to be non-conductive, working that close to the power lines. If we have a range limiter, we'd have to use it. We have to know how to program that and know how to test it. Non-conductive tag lines must be used if we use tag lines. We would, of course, want to barricade around that crane, at least 10 feet, probably more, because the people who get hurt are the people on the ground. And so we want to keep everybody away from that crane. We only want the workers that need to be there. We don't want anybody in the area that does not need to be there. We want to make sure that crane is properly grounded. Now, this stuff is going to be handled by the power company, and of course we want to take their lead. And the truth is, when we're working this close to power lines, we're taking their direction. There's things that they have to do. They have to deactivate the automatic re-energizer before we start, so that if contact was made, it would shut off and would not come back on. We can and we do work safely around power lines. It's important if you're an operator, an oiler, a rigger, or anybody working around power lines that you understand the standards and use those standards to protect yourself, the crew, and the public.